All right. Good morning, everyone. I hope you are all doing well. Um, I see many of the names here were in yesterday's webinar, so it's good to see you all again so soon. But yeah, welcome back to the webinar Wednesday. Today is a very exciting day because I actually have two guests in the in the webinar with us. So first, a familiar face is Zach. He's going to be co-hosting this session with me. And our real guest for today is Ismail Dhorat, who is, I'd say he's part of the initial generation of South Africans that got into IT when IT was, just entering South Africa in the 80s and the 90s. There was this first generation that took to it, and well, some of them have made it very, very successful careers out of it. So we've managed to get him on board with this webinar. And yeah, I won't give too much away. I always like to let the guests tell us a little bit about themselves rather than we doing it. So over to you, Ismail.
Assalamu alaikum. Jazakallah for the introduction and for the great words, but I'm not going to take the let's call it the honor of being like one of the early generations, because I remember there were very few people who used to work on punch cards. It wasn't as popular. But yeah, so I've been involved in the tech industry for the better part of I'm 45 now, so I would say about over 30 years. I started off in school. I've seen many generations of technology and things that go through cycles. And yeah, so I would say we were probably the first generation that sort of started growing up with when the internet was starting to take off. But that was very early stages of the internet. Just give me it was very early in the internet generation. So as the technology was going new, because you had the old, let's call it the old technologists who were, let's call it programmers. And you had like it wasn't a lot of people in South Africa who were doing programming for the banks, because most of the companies didn't even have computers, right? It was completely unheard of. It was just the major banks that used to have, very big companies that used to have technology because they were quite expensive. At that time, you had mainframes, like big rooms, huge rooms. One of the old uncles, he used to do, when he started programming in the 60s or 70s, he used to do programs on punch cards. And he actually kept the punch cards up to about 10 years ago. And when I visited him, he showed me some of those punch cards. And his job was to program those punch cards. And then when the program was finished, change the punch cards. And, so technology has evolved a lot. We came out, when I was just growing up, my dad got me a Commodore 64. That was my first, let's call it, computer. And I still recall that was, let's call it, my first interaction with computers. I bought like there was no internet, like dial-up internet even at that time. I think it was in the early 90s, like 92, 93. And there was a manual that the guy gave us with the Commodore 64, and we sat and there was this program. You sat, like I said, the whole day, like 12, 13. I punched out all these commands. I realized now they're programming commands. I didn't know what it was. Punched out all those commands and like probably spent like 4 hours writing this huge, massive program. And all it did was, at the end of the day, it was move a ball around the screen, which bounced around. And then my dad didn't know much about computers because he never came from that. So he bought a computer which didn't have any memory on it. So it's Commodore 64, but it didn't have memory. So you type out the old program and then you reboot it and your program would be gone.
Everything is gone.
And you wanted it again, you would have to type it out again. So that was where I sort of started. And then we moved to, I think the internet just started taking off. It was dial-up internet. So we started getting onto the internet. And
so could those Commodore machines connect to the internet at that point?
I think they had a modem, but they were all like accessories, and it wasn't like internet
Right,
in South
as it
Africa was
was.
very basic in the early 90s. It was mostly universities that had access. I think dial-up internet only started becoming public right about 93, 94, somewhere around there.
Okay.
It was very costly. But anyways, thankfully my dad was future looking in that he, even though he didn't understand the technology up to today, he's not like a computer person. He went and bought me a computer, a used one. It was a cheap one and it wasn't very good. It was like, a year to, I mean, at the time when we got the Commodore 64, Intel processing computers were out, 386s and stuff. And I remember visiting someone who was
Hmm.
quite wealthy and they had an Intel computer and it was like, ooh, this big thing. And, it ran
Oh
programs and,
yeah, yeah.
it ran games and we could play on it. It was like an exciting thing to go to the
Revolutionary.
house and play with the computer, right?
Right.
Um, so yeah, so we had that, and then we went onto the internet, and then my, let's call it, love for the tech and internet and computers sort of grew from there. And I was very, let's call it, I didn't have access around me. There was no one. I grew up in a place called Stanger. There was no one else who
Hmm.
was, computer. There was like one person, I think, who I knew of. So when we had problems, we had to solve those problems ourselves. We couldn't Google what's the answer
Mm.
to this. So it helped us learn the technology very well. So, for
Mm.
example, from the building of the computers, putting the things together. So, if I had to make any recommendations to people, is get away from your smartphones and your tablets and get nitty-gritty in building a computer. Um, because that's going to teach you from the ground up how these technologies work: memory, hard drive,
Mm.
computation,
Right.
how the parts go together, networking. Because when we started, there was no one else. So we had to, like, okay, I need to buy this part. Go and ask my dad, please, can I buy this part? You say no, you need to do some work, pocket money, or you go get a job,
Right.
part-time job, and then you save up money to buy a part, then you put your computer together, and then you work and then you keep upgrading, right? So we have that was our experience with
Mm.
today's time. I would recommend anyone who's involved in tech and like go back to the basics. Don't stay on tablets and stuff because that gives you a very basic view, and it depends where you want to go.
Right. Yeah.
Going to
Yeah.
become, a specialist. I think it's important to understand the foundations and where they
Yeah.
came from. And we were able to learn those foundations. I'll give you an idea. We installed. I got very early into Linux, which is an open source software. So Slackware 3 was the version we installed. And I got into Linux by mistake. I went to a market and there was this this guy, and he was selling these Linux CDs for like probably 5 Rand or 2 Rand or something. And Linux is free, but he was just trying to make some money. And then I think I bought some used computer equipment from him. And I so okay, give me the CD as well. Got the CD, and it had a like manual. He printed out a manual how to install it, and you had to, at those days you had to set every single parameter in Linux. What's your monitor refresh rate? There was no automatic, drivers and all of that you get today. So we learned a lot about the basics of computers just by the difficulty of what we
Mm.
had to go through. To give you an idea, it took us about a week or two, or it took me about a week or two. Me and my cousin used to work on this, um, to get the modem to connect to the internet because we couldn't figure out how to do that. And we spent,
Right. Right.
and then imagine you got this problem. You want to connect to the internet, dial up, but you got no access to the internet. And the only thing you have is this little manual, and you've got to figure out and keep trying and trying to solve the problem. And then okay, try to get hold of somebody. There's no cell phones. So you got to speak to somebody. Okay, I'm dealing with this problem. How do I solve it? And then finally we found out, okay, we had the initialization string on the modem incorrect. And then up to today, which is 30 years later, I can still tell you what the initialization string of a modem is at that time to connect to the internet.
Wow. Yeah, those kind of lessons stick with you. It's and I always love hearing about the technology. We say back then because it seems like it was such a long time ago because of how basic everything was. But really, it wasn't really that long ago. It was less than a generation ago. It was like 30 years ago. And when you look at technology today, where it's come, and so, but what's funny is that the same questions still exist, right? As they did back then. So people always, when it comes to careers in tech, back then people were like, how far is this gonna go? Is there really opportunities in this new thing that's coming out? And till today, 30 years later, how far everything has gone, it's still the same thing, parents asking their children, is this technology, is there really opportunities in there? How far can you go in it? So, um, as someone who's been in the industry for so long, maybe you can shed some light on that, on the current career outlook when it comes to IT.
Yeah, if I can just elaborate on the question just a bit, I think it's a similar sort of transition that's happening where, back then the invention was the internet, and that became mainstream. And now you could argue that it's AI and how mainstream that's becoming and how much it's affecting jobs. I think yesterday somebody told me that a whole team of chartered accountants were fired and replaced by an AI. They were retrenched. And it becomes scary when trying to get into a career at this point because you don't know what's going to last in the what's going to exist in the next 5 years and what's not. And is there a way that we can predict it in a way? Yeah.
So, okay, so from my experience, I'm just going to talk about my experience. I've seen
Mm-hmm.
multiple generations of technologies come and go. There was the biggest wave you could say in the last 30 years was, you had let's call it the wave of computation, which was the mainframes. Then you had the wave of personal computing, which was,
Mm-hmm.
Commodore 64s, i386s, and all of that. And then you had the deployment of the internet. But then you had, based on the internet, now you've got multiple sort of generations of technologies that have cycles that have come about, which is social media, the rise of
Right.
social media, e-commerce. Then AI is dependent on the internet, right? If you didn't have
Mm-hmm.
that huge, massive uptick on the internet, you wouldn't have had AI today like it is today, because effectively all your AI models are
Hosted, yeah.
consolidating data on the internet and building an AI model on that, right?
Right.
The large language models. So yes, so we actually looked at the future. So I also did postgraduate studies at UCT Graduate School of Business. I did an executive MBA and I did a postgraduate diploma. And one of our projects, we actually looked at the future of jobs based on the trends that are happening, right? And it's very hard to predict the future. You can't obviously predict the future, but you can see where things are going, right? And the question is, are we going to replace humans fully? I don't think so. Personally, I don't think so. And I think, and the reason why I say that is we always get to a point in technology where we think we're going to automate everything, but we find that we don't, right? But that doesn't mean jobs are not going to be at risk, right? So to give you an idea, my practical scenario is this: when I started programming back in the let's say mid 90s, and I started doing websites and stuff, you needed a team of 5 to 10 people, 6 months to launch a e-commerce store. Today, I take a developer who hasn't, not even like the most advanced developer, give him a day or two, give him a few, let's call it programming packages and frameworks, and he'll be able to put out a e-commerce store in 2 days.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not even talking about SaaS services. So that developer is doing the job of what 10 people did and 3 months did 30 years ago, right? So what's happened is the scale of what someone can achieve has increased due to the baseline foundations we've put, right? So that has a benefit and a negative, right? So I'll tell you the benefit. The benefit is the developer who's on that, who understands the frameworks and all of that. They can get something done very quickly. They understand it at a very base level, push out something in 2 days. The negative is a lot of those developers who depend on these tools don't understand the basics. So I'm not sure what the audience, I'm assuming a lot of them are developers or interested in tech.
Students.
So I'm going to go into the little bit of the nitty-gritty. So to give you an idea, I grew up in a time where we had to work with data directly. So we had to use like a programming language called SQL, right? Structured query language. So I understood the basics. Now in today's development environment, people are using tools called object relational models, ORMs, right? But they only ever interact with data at the ORM level. So they never get down to the bottom. So they don't understand the basics, right? So there's a little bit of a, let's call it, challenge there when you find, and I've hired developers like this who only came out, let's say they're in their 20s now. And I find that there's a stark difference in age. So the older developers understand and the younger ones don't. And the reason for is they've grown up, in another generation. So my advice is to make yourself completely relevant is learn the top level of stuff, but also go to the foundations and get those foundations right. Because if you get those foundations right, you will be very hard to be replaced by AI. But the easy stuff at the top will be easily replaced. The creative stuff at the bottom is going to be hard to replace. The person who's building the AI models cannot be replaced. The person who's doing, just pulling stuff from Stack Overflow and putting things together is probably going to get replaced. The person who's coming up with creative solutions to a problem is going to be hard to replace. An AI model is only going to be able to tell you what is in the data. It can't come up with a creative solution. So if you go to an AI model and you say, analyze me all these, and I've been using it for my studying. I upload my papers onto Notebook LM from Google, and I asked it to give me a summary. So it helps me. It's like very good in helping me summarize the material, but it's not going to let me be creative in terms of coming up with something new from that. Something that is not in the data. And that's where I think we as humans, we are excessively good at. We are able to come up with creative solutions with minimal amounts of data and be creative. So, someone was asking me for advice recently. He wanted to find out what to study from like where to go and what to study at university. And I told him, okay, what you need to do is see if you have get a technical degree, but pair that up with a design or something from the design faculty. So go do computer science, but see if you can do something like architecture or graphic design or something with that, because that's going to give you that integration between the creative plus the technical.
Right. Yeah, I think that there's always been a trend in humanity that when something gets accessible and super easy and everybody can if everybody can do it, it kind of loses value. And so, when you say making a website used to take a team, now it only takes one person. That's not a good thing, because it means that you have a lot more competition. And so I love that you have to pair it with that human touch, with that creative touch to stand out. And it's exactly the sentiment my father echoes, where it says when it comes to app development or website development, you're not creating an app, you are solving a problem. And I think that resonates with people a lot because of the reality that we are now, in. But you mentioned that you have to obviously pair now your technical qualifications with more creative side of things. And maybe if I can ask you that, when it comes to that initial creation of Xi Labs and the challenges there, the problems that you had to sort of solve? Because it seems so unrealistic, starting from, like us and our audience here. It seems like such a big step to go from just being a developer at your home, trying to get some work, to actually becoming an entrepreneur. It seems almost unrealistic at times. So I would love to have a bit of a look into Xylab and how you created that, because it's data analytics, and I don't even think people understand the importance of data in today's day and age. It's all about data. And how were you so proactive in this field that now the world essentially operates on data? It's like the new oil.
Yeah, so in terms of entrepreneurship, I've had lots of experience. I started my first business like while in high school, because I realized that time no one was doing websites, so I started doing websites for people. That was my
Okay.
pocket money. So that was my first, one of my first businesses. So there's a lot of experience. So what I would recommend is get the experience. It is difficult to break into, let's call it, the corporate world and getting contracts and stuff, because it's a lot about networks, especially, right? And then what happens
Right.
is, as you're working somewhere, you meet people, and that's how you get your, let's call it, mentors and your experience. So I would recommend anyone wanting to go into entrepreneurship is firstly either go work at a company for a few years, make good connections, and then what you do is from there you're going to have a network of people that you know.
Right.
That's one. Or the second option is join an existing network of entrepreneurs that's going to support you and get a mentor. Like that was my biggest mistake. If I had to look back, if I had a mentor who was guiding me, I think I would have been a lot more successful. I had to figure out a lot of things on my own and then go to study and all of that, right? A lot of hard lessons. A mentor, someone who's experienced, someone who's got experience in the business world, will be able to guide you and say, okay, don't do this, don't do that, do it like this. And don't take their stuff as gospel, but it's going to help you think, right? So that's the first set of. Second part is on like, how did we get started with Xylab? So I started it in 2008, but we did various things over the years. We did, what was it? Software development and a whole bunch of things. But in 2009, I saw that time AI wasn't as hyped as it was now, but I made a proposal to a company where I was telling them you need to use, at that time I wasn't calling AI, but I was calling data analytics, advanced, I can't remember what used. Oh yes, I was proposing to them to use something called social network analysis, and predictive analytics. I think I called it predictive analytics. Predictive analytics, for they had a problem with customers leaving. And I said, I went to them with a proposal. I said, this is the proposal, and you've got lots of data. You're not using all this data. All you're using this data is for billing, right? And because we were consulting in the company, I realized the problem and I came up with a solution. I proposed it to them. This was in 2009. I think I was a very early, let's call it early adopter or whatever. And I had presented it to one of the executives, and they didn't give the budget or whatever. And then I went on to do other things. I did a startup. I did a few other things. And then in 2015, I had just come off a project where we did a startup. And it so happened that in that executive who I presented this proposal to was, heading up data analytics at this stage. And someone had come to him and pitched almost the exact same thing 6 years later, right? He said, "Hey, AI is going to be big," but now the words, the names of things change. Big data,
Right.
AI, this, that. So then he's like, wait, hang on a second. 6 years ago, this guy proposed this to me. So he gave me a call and he's like, can you come help us with this?
Right.
So I said, okay, no problem. We'll help you. We're gonna because he was like, okay, you actually like proposed this to us like 5-6 years ago. We should have gone. So and that's how we sort of honed in on the data analytics side.
Oh, and I love that it started off with a problem, right? It
Yeah.
wasn't just the idea that came out of nowhere. You saw this in this company you were working at or you're consulting with, there was this problem and you came up with a solution. But I think the real wisdom comes in seeing that that solution that you created isn't just going to be unique to this specific business, but it has value in just about every industry out there. That's really amazing.
Yeah, so I
Yeah.
mean, but you know, that's a very good way to actually also think about entrepreneurship and business. Is you go and work in an industry, and then learn what the problems are, and then you figure out solutions. To give you an idea, one of the best solutions we have was, I mean, and you know, our customer, we've had that customer for sure. In 2026, it'll be 10 years. So a decade they've been, you know, using our solution, and we've upgraded it, but it's so core to their business that they haven't put off that software, and they pay us on a yearly basis for the software. But the reason they do that is because we solved a real problem. Because you have, you know, and that's where you can differentiate yourself, because we're a very small consulting firm. We're not a big consulting firm.
Right.
And that's where you can differentiate yourself against the big developers and the big firms, right? If you're small, you can offer real value. And that's what we were very dedicated, because the big guys, they're doing sales, they just worry about making contract, getting a contract and selling the solution, right? They're not thinking about solving real problems. So what we did there was they had a problem in their retentions. People were canceling. So a similar issue, but what we realized was when the guy was making the decision how to speak to the guy on the phone, he was spending about probably 5 to 10 minutes. So he's on the phone with the guy wants to cancel. He's like, okay, hang on a second. He's going into this system, going into that system, going into that. So we sat with the guy and we looked at what he was doing. They got an Excel format and it was, you know, just taking a long time. And we said, okay, fine. It was a really simple solution. We pull in the data from different places. We automate the model that he was running in his head, and we put it in and we give him all the information. So now when he's speaking to the guy, he punches in the guy's phone number or details. It pops up on the screen. This is all the details on the guy, gives him everything he needs to make the decision. There's no holding on. So his time went from 10 minutes to now less than a minute in that conversation. The customer is not frustrated because they're like, okay, why am I hanging on? Hang on a second. While I'm logging into this system. Oh, wait, my system is hanging, you know, all of that. So you're reducing all that frustration. So, but it takes being, it's not also a technical skill. It's being able to observe what's going on and seeing, okay, here's where the actual problem lies. And that's a skill that you need to develop as well. How do you observe what's going on? And how do you recognize what the key problem is? Because someone could have went into that problem and said, oh, we need to do this and we need to do that. You know, an example I'll give you, we did one well, they asked us to do some innovation, right? Consulting. And someone said they did a project, or they heard of a project of a company. I'm not going to mention the company name. So what they spent like millions and millions and millions to develop a cigarette that is waterproof, that you can smoke in rain, right? And they launched it, you know, in a test environment. And they had this innovation lab, and the guys came up with this idea. Oh, fantastic. And like, no one's buying it.
Right.
Like, why is no one buying it? Like, the obvious answer is no one wants to stand and smoke in the rain. They want to stand under. So you know, you gotta think about others. Is the solution I'm building actually going to solve the problem, or is there something else that thing? And oftentimes because you know, you got to temper you get excited about this technology, you enjoy technology, you like to learn about technology. So you're like, okay, I want to do this, I want to do that. But you've also got to come back, as Zakaria was saying, and you've got to come back to the problem. You've got to come back. What am I trying to solve? Yeah.
Sure. And I think that speaks to one of the questions we have as well from Rumesa, who asks, what are the most essential tools and programming languages for data analysts today? And my answer was a little bit of a joke, but it's just Excel, because it comes down to, you know, how deep you need to go into this data, what type of data you analyze it, and sometimes just looking at them all laid out is enough. But can you give us a little bit more insight into that question?
I think
Yeah. So
specifically for like well, I mean, on a student level, someone getting into your industry,
yeah.
in today's world, what's the go-to tools and languages?
So I mean, as Zakaria is saying, I think start off with Excel, because if you know Excel well and you go into an organization, you are able to deliver. Like, I mean, you know, when I started, even though I didn't go to a formal university, I was self-taught in tech, right? So I taught myself how to do things. So I was able to go into an example was, you know, I had a consulting agreement and I had someone who had vastly more qualifications reporting into me. And the only reason was I was able to use, you know, maybe how to put this? I was able to leverage technologies better than the other person. He didn't grow up with tech, so he didn't know how to put solutions together. You know, so as an example, we had he would spend like a day going through a mailbox, right? And then going through, because we used to get alerts from, you know, partners, and they would send these alerts, and you had to look at the alert, and then you had to action it, right? Do some action. And that would take like a day, but then every day you would get these alerts. So here's one guy's job was every day to go through this thing, and it would take him like 5 to 6 hours. So it was like 70% of the day. I went in there and I was like, no, man, this doesn't make sense, right? You know, and you can't be sitting just going through and like clicking.
Yeah.
This is like and this was, and what I did was like, okay, fine. How do I put a solution together? You know, what's the quickest and easiest solution? Okay, Excel and a plugin for Outlook, right? So plugin for Outlook, read all the emails and saved it to a folder, right? Then I think I wrote a little script, because it saved each attachment separately, which came as a CSV file. I wrote a little script which took all the CSV files, combined into one, and then all this guy had to do was open it Excel, right? Once a day, and he would go through all the rows and check everything, right? And it took him from 6 hours to a day, right? So that was just understanding the technology. Now it's the same, you know, analyzing data. If you understand pivot tables, you can analyze data very well. You understand how to do lookups on Excel, things like that, all of those little Excel. So I would start there. Let's call that a base level of understanding and doing data analytics, right? And then you can add value to any organization if you can do that. Then let's call it the second level would be understanding databases and SQL, right? Because not all data is going to come out into Excel. So if you're limited by what Excel can do, you're going to have to tell somebody, okay, please, can you extract this data for me? Then they'll go to a database, they'll extract it for you, and then you can analyze it in Excel, right? So the next step would be to understand SQL and how to interact with data on a database, because a lot of data is locked up into databases today, right? So that would be your next level. And then your third level would be now programmatically analyzing data using a tool like Python. Python, I would recommend, is the best analytics tool out there in the data space. So then you use a programming language, and that takes you to a much higher level. Now you can automate your analytics. So let's say you had one person, and we've done this before, one person who was doing a job where he was getting data from here, getting data from there, putting it together. Then he would do some manual stuff in Excel, run a report, and then email it. And we've done projects where the project we did was actually replacing that guy's job with a script and populating a dashboard, and then that guy does other things. He's got better work to do. So these technologies may put people out of jobs, but it also lets people do better things. Instead of doing this
100%.
repetitive task on a day-to-day basis, he can now spend doing more important things.
I mean, someone, I forget who said it or how the saying goes, but it's something like your value is determined by the size of the problems you solve. So I think, I mean, if you want to be someone who AI cannot replace, solve big problems, find solutions to problems.
Yeah, I think you should, if you are concerned about like AI replacing you in your career, I like to look at it like this. If AI is just another person who's better at my job than me, then yeah, aren't they gonna get the job? If somebody is, so you just have to simply see what what value can you give that AI cannot. It's a competitor in your field. I would put it like that. So I think we have a few more questions. I think William Daniel Maestri, in terms of your questions, I think we did cover most of it, but just let me know if you are satisfied with that. And then Rumesa has a follow-up question: is a go-to resource for helping you, throughout your journey in terms of learning. And I think you did cover that by saying it was your process of understanding and figuring it out for yourself that kind of gave you that fundamental understanding.
Yeah, so yes, so I was talking about the early stages, but then once the internet came out, but we didn't have Google, right? So we still used to rely a lot on books. So you used to literally have a physical book, and you would sit with the book and look at the code and write it, and then try to figure out, it's not working. Why isn't it working? There was no Stack Overflow. There was no ChatGPT. You had to problem solve. So in terms of resources, we used to use the internet a lot. If you've got everybody's on email here, I can generate a set of resource lists that would be suitable for someone who's beginning, because we've got we write in a blog where we share some of our insights on data. It may be very technical. I'll post that link on the stuff. But if you go there,
I would really appreciate that.
and you'll see how some of the stuff that one of my senior engineers, architects, CTO, he writes the post. But you got to, when you're thinking about tech, you've got to split things in your head in two ways, right? And I think this is taking me almost, let's call it 40 years to realize, or 30 years to realize. You've got to split out the tech and what's the underlying principles, right? Because if you understand the underlying principles of how the thing works, whether you're using Python, I'm just taking as a programming language, whether you're using Python, Ruby, JavaScript, it becomes easy. So you can move into any language, right? So with data, it's the same. If you understand the foundational principles, then you can use any technologies easily. So, just to make it practically useful, take databases, right? Databases is a wide variety. There's a lot of databases. If you go Google, there's probably now at least 1,000, different databases. And that's going to create a lot of noise in your head. Why is there so many databases? It's going to be confusing. What tools do I need to worry? Right? But how do you be effective as a technologist, as a programmer, selecting that? You understand, oh, wait, hang on a second. These 10 or 20 or 100 databases are all following the same sort of paradigm and the same way of doing things. These 50 are doing this in the same way. There may be small differences between it. So you understand the underlying principles from there, and then you're able to use the tools. So yes, the tools are important, but I think what you need to do is split between the tools and what's the underlying principles. And if you look at that blog, you'll see he talks about some of these principles underlying data engineering as an example. But I'm happy to share, I'll share it with you all offline, and then you all can share it with everyone.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
definitely.
Yeah.
That would be
I'll
so
circulate
fantastic.
it on all our student channels. I see we do have a few more questions, but I think we've taken enough of your time, Ismail. In fact, we've gone a little bit over time, so I think we'll leave it there, and maybe in a couple of weeks' time we can do a follow-up session, if
Okay,
you are
no
open to it.
problem.
But yeah, Jazakallah so much for taking the time today to speak to us and to give our students some insights into your industry and the background of technology in the country. I hope you guys really enjoyed it. I hope you benefited something from it. And as always, if you have any feedback, let us know, and we will pass your comments over to Ismail.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.
Excellent.
Bye, everyone.